And there's a lot of agents who've been licensed for a long time who don't close 29 transactions in a year. And where are you going to learn the most? It's in transactions. Where do you learn the documents the best? It's in transactions. Where do you learn contract strategy the best? In transactions. So what you want is you want transactions under your belt, and find a way to get those quicker and more of them. That's my suggestion. Not every team is going to be a fit. I probably 2 or 3 times every month the interview wants to talk with me about joining my team. I'm not a fit for most people. The way that I want to run my business and run my team, the way that what they want and need is just not something that I'm, wanting to do at this point. So I generally tell them hey, I don't think I'm a good fit for you, to be honest. But there are teams that may be a good fit. So I think it's worth, if you're trying to decide how you want to kick it off and get going, I would maybe interview some teams and see if that's a fit. So, but as you're sort of looking to grow, I think that generally just offering something to people instead of asking for something from people is going to get you farther. So I call people, text people constantly. If I'm in my car, I'm on the phone. And I don't ever ask. I don't ask for referrals ever, by the way. I know that's backwards. They generally, they teach you that every time you touch base with somebody, you should ask for some business. I don't ever ask for business. I don't like that. I don't want them to see my phone, my caller ID come up on their phone and have them think, oh, Cody wants something. What is Cody going to ask me for? I would rather it be the other way around, that they feel guilty that I'm always giving them something. Right? Because for me, whether that leads to business or not, my life is generally better the more people that I have that I like and that like me. So the relationship is worth the time to me. So I have a top golf pass, and that's generally what I'm doing is dude, I haven't seen you forever. Let's go hit some balls, or why don't you just take my pass and take your family? If I'm always offering them something, doing something for them, generally they're going to feel like they owe me something and they need to get out and find me some business. So does that answer your question?
No, I think that's awesome. That showed your kind of route to building your army, as to use your words, your army out there looking for business for you. So
yeah. And the reason that this is going to help, honestly, the contracts themselves, the reason that's going to help is because when you go into a buyer consult and they're trying to decide who they should hire as a realtor, how many of you have closed 0 transactions so far? Okay, all of you. What do you say to somebody to tell them to hire you then? I mean, all of us have been in the exact spot that you are. So there's nothing wrong with being in the spot that you are. But you've got to find something, and it can't just be, oh, I'll give you a percentage of the commission back. Because then they're not hiring you. They're hiring a refund. Right? People don't go to McDonald's because it's great. Okay? They go to McDonald's because it's convenient and it's cheaper than Five Guys. Okay? But they're not going to McDonald's because they like it. Well, maybe some people are, I guess. That crap's not food. But you want them to hire you because maybe you're willing to give them a little bit of a break on commission. Okay. But that can't be the reason. So the things that I tell people in a buyer consult is hey, look, most people don't interview any realtors. And when they do, they don't ask them the right questions. So what you want to ask someone when you interview them, and I tell my clients or my prospective clients to ask 2 questions. For you, I would avoid one of those and I would stick to one of them. The 2 I tell them to ask is hey, you want to ask them how much business have they closed in the last 3 months? Why do you guys think that's important? Why do you, for me, right? I'm an experienced agent now and I do a good amount of business. Why am I telling someone to ask? Go interview agents. I don't care. I'm not scared of that. Go interview them. But you should ask them how much business they've closed in the last 3 months. Why?
Like you said, it's the more experience you're going to get is in transactions.
But why the last 3 months? The current market is not the last 2 years, right? It's not even a year ago. It's now. It's the last 90 days. The market shifts. The market now is very different than it was 90 days ago. Okay, so that's part of it. The other part is, if you haven't had any closings in the last 3 months, whether it's on purpose or not, whether it's consciously or not, you're going to want this to get across the finish line and get you paid sooner and easier, which means you're going to be less likely to encourage your clients to be aggressive. You're going to be less likely to encourage your clients to push back where maybe you have some leverage. You're going to be less likely to put in the effort to find leverage in areas that you can negotiate because you want it to be quicker and easier so you can get a check because you haven't had one in 3 months. Or if they haven't closed anything in the last 3 months, maybe they're not a full-time agent and this is something they do as they moonlight and they don't want this to like dominate their life. They don't want to worry about this every day. They want it to go smooth and easy, right? So after an inspection, maybe there's nothing that's super concerning. An agent who hasn't closed anything in a few months doesn't want to rock the boat. So they're going to say, hey, these things are very normal, totally fine. You know, you're going to see this in any house. I don't think we should ask them for anything. Whereas if I got a commission check a week ago and one the week before that and one the week before that, I'm okay if this takes a little bit. I'm okay if this isn't the right house and the seller won't negotiate and we need to go find a new one. So I'm going to say, hey, there are these things. They should have addressed these. Let's make them address them, right? Just the experience your client gets is very different. So that's for me why I ask about the recent past in terms of transaction count. Beyond that, where I would avoid that for you right now, but I would say is, okay, go interview agents. Ask them what are the specific things they do to get you more of what you want as a buyer, right? If I'm telling this to a buyer, go interview agents. Ask them what are the specific things they will do to get you what you want. Most agents don't have an answer, at least nothing like specifically. Well, I run comps. Okay, great. So does everyone. How does a comp help me get what I want? All you're doing now is telling me if the home is worth what it's listed at. I don't want to get it for what it's worth. I want to get it for below what it's worth. Right? As a buyer, you don't want to pay what it's worth. You want to get a deal. Now, that may not be reality on every transaction, but so those are the things I tell them. Hey, ask them what specific things they do. One of the specific things that I do is I know my freaking contract documents. I know the clauses in them that can help me, that can hurt me, that can put my client at risk, that can put the seller at risk when I'm on the other side. And I know how to use things and word things. The blank addendum, we'll go through that. Well, I mean, there's nothing really to go through. It's blank. That's my playground. That's where I win, is the blank addendum. Because I'm going to word stuff in a way that sounds like one thing, but it's really a different thing. Okay, for example, we have an experienced agent, a very, very experienced agent in this brokerage who well, I won't give too much away, but he's shared some things with me about the transaction that he's going through right now, or about our transaction, that maybe I would have kept, you know, a little tighter and not have said anything about. He's not necessarily hurting his clients, but it's maybe given us a little bit of hope that we can be a little more aggressive. But beyond that, there's some things that I put in some contract documents that his response was, I don't think you can do that. Like, hey, don't worry about it. I got it. Just see if your client's okay with it and get them to sign. I'll figure everything else out because I know that we can do that because I've done it. And I have experienced agents tell me all the time, oh, you can't write that in there. I'm like, oh, yes, we can. Trust me. My LO will be fine with it. So anyway, it's important that you understand these things, okay? So,
Hello, loan ops.
Oh, yeah.
Just in case you guys.
Yes, sorry. Okay, so the first document that you need to know, right, when it comes to writing offers, right? You've already gone over, hopefully, like buyer-broker agreement, that kind of stuff, right? Are you familiar with that? Okay. The big thing is, obviously, the buyer-broker agreement.
Some might not, because his license just came in like today.
Okay. So are you familiar with the buyer-broker agreement?
I mean, only through.
Okay. So the way that I present a buyer-broker agreement to a client is, hey, look, I know that people oftentimes look at this as like, I'm locking you in, but this is more of a commitment from me to you. This is outlining my job and my duties and my commitment to you. That's more of what this is than anything, okay? Because the commission rate that I put in there, I'm going to put 3%, and the buyer is agreeing that if the seller won't pay it, they will. Honestly, I've only had that happen one time. And it was because it was a unique scenario that it was still in my buyer's best interest, and we just absolutely owned the sellers on that one, even though they didn't know it. So that one was great. But everything else is like written in stone, right? Like it's boilerplate. There's not fill-in scenarios. This is my job as a realtor. This is my commitment to you. And that's why I tell clients, like, look, the stuff that I can fill in can be changed. These things that outline my commitment to you and my job and my fiduciary responsibility, those can't change. Like that is in stone. I have to do this for you. So the buyer-broker agreement shouldn't be scary for a buyer because they're more getting me to commit to them than vice versa. Okay, that's the way I present it. And the commission rate in there, I've already told you, if my buyer commits to 3% is the commission I'm getting paid, I take what I need to take to make the deal work for my clients. Okay, now sometimes that's 3%, oftentimes it's 3%, but there's a lot of times it's not. Okay, so the buyer-broker agreement, like I said, the big thing is like some people get awkward when they're talking about this, especially with a client. None of this should be awkward. The more awkward you are talking about it, or the more nervous you are, the more awkward and sort of like cagey the buyer is going to be about it too. So if you're like, hey, so this is the buyer-broker agreement. This outlines my responsibility to you. Okay, I'm committing to you for a period of up to 6 months or until we close on a home, whichever sooner. Okay, but just know that my duty and responsibility to you doesn't end when we close. I'm still like, if you need title documents, like come to me, I'll get them for you. You don't need to like keep everybody's contact info. I've got it, right? You need a plumber? I've got it. I've got emotional equity in your home once we close. And I'm still your realtor, even though we don't have an active buyer-broker agreement at that point. So that's kind of how I go through that. But beyond that, the first thing that you'll go through is going to be the Rep C. Okay, this is how we go about writing an offer. And I realize I've got this kind of like blocking your view a little bit over here. But so who was at my last negotiation course? Were you there? I think you were. So one of the things that I talked through is typically when people get into like negotiating, what are the things they typically negotiate based on? Price, like net to the seller, right? What is the seller making is like really what it comes down to, money, okay? But there are so many things in here beyond that. What's the very first thing that you're filling in here beyond the offer date and name? What's this? You guys remember what this is? This is the earnest money section. It's the first thing that you're having to choose something in it, like in way of an offer, right? What am I offering here is earnest money. What needs to be there? What's the amount that has to be there? What's that? I've done zero.
The least amount possible.
I have done zero. Well, usually. So this is where the scenario matters. Okay, so I think I've shared with you, maybe I shared with you. So my home that I live in now, this was in 2021. Okay, what was happening in 21 real estate wise? It was freaking nuts. I had a home that we got 23 offers in 24 hours once. Okay, it was in West Jordan. Oh man, it sucked. It just sorting through all those offers, going through all those offers with clients. It was awesome, but sucky. Okay, but the scenario here matters. Okay, my house, it just listed. It was a Thursday. They weren't allowing showings till the open house Saturday. I was showing homes in South Vineyard by Sleepy Ridge Golf Course, saw it pop up. I hadn't looked in Vineyard yet, but looked good. And I saw that the listing agent was out of St. George, which is weird. We don't see that a lot. So I called the listing agent. He says, oh, I'm not really listing it for him. I just had to throw it on the MLS because the seller made an offer on a home I've got down here. We accepted. He has to have his home on the MLS within 7 days. So he basically just paid me a little bit for me to put it on the MLS there for him. So he's representing himself. I'm like, sweet, right? I get someone who doesn't know what the hell they're doing, and I get to negotiate against that. But so I just drive over and knock on the door. He says, no, we're not allowing showings. I'm like, I'm here. Let me see it. So he let me. Okay, walk through, see it. I know he's going to get multiple offers, a bunch of offers. So I say, okay, I want it off the market today. I'll pay your asking price. And what does the average seller think about earnest money? What's that? Free money? Okay, but what, like, in terms of the amount? Okay, they think higher is better, right? I know he thinks that because he's just a dumb seller. He's not a realtor. Okay? He thinks more is better. And by the way, you as a listing agent, more isn't always better either for you either. Okay, and we'll talk about why. But so I threw like $25,000 in earnest money wise. Seller thinks that's freaking awesome. Right? As a buyer, that was in my best interest to do that because it makes him want to take my offer right now, under contract, right? And we've talked about this in my negotiations before. Can a seller cancel?
Not without breaching contract.
They can only default. Seller can't cancel, they can default, right? And down here, later in the Rep C, says what happens if a seller defaults. Buyer gets their earnest money back, and now the seller has to match it out of their pocket, right? So if he wanted to default, and that's only if I accept that, right? I could say, no, I don't accept that $25,000 that you want to pay me to cancel, to default. I'm going to sue you and enforce the contract. And depending on the scenario, judge would rule in my favor. If he's just canceling because he got a higher offer after he accepted mine, tough. That's not a good reason to cancel. Judge isn't going to uphold that. If he lost his job and now he can't afford the new house he's moving into and has to buy, okay. Judge might rule in his favor on that one. But I'm at least getting $25,000 free dollars as a buyer. Okay? So more isn't necessarily always better for a seller. Less isn't necessarily always better for a buyer, right? It depends on the scenario. We're trying to get a home here as a buyer. What's the scenario for this home? Believe it or not, in this current market, I just ran into a multiple offer situation on Friday. It doesn't make sense. It had been listed 4 days and we ended up with like 5 offers on it. And we were one of those 5 offers. So we had to adjust to try to win. And we did, but that's not common now, but you got to be ready to adjust and adapt. You can't just tell your client, oh, well, in this market, no one should do this. Well, how bad do you want the home? How much real competition is there? How are you making sure it's real competition, right? Like, is it well priced? This one was priced probably 25 grand below where it should have been. And that's part of why we're like, hey, we're having to come up $7,000 to win, and it still is like $18,000 below where it should probably be. So we've still got some equity here, okay? But this generally, a seller expects, a listing agent expects to see somewhere in the range of about 1% of the purchase price, okay? Somewhere-ish. If it's a $500,000 home, seller expects to see something anywhere from like $3,500 to $5,000 or so, okay? As a buyer's agent, I tell my clients, like, look, we can put whatever the hell we want here because I'm never letting you get to a point where it's actually at risk. If we are at all concerned about our ability to close before we hit our financing and appraisal deadline, and we're either going to push back that finance and appraisal deadline or we're going to cancel. I'm not going to let your earnest money be at risk. So I tell my clients, whatever's here doesn't really matter because it's not on the line. I'm not going to allow it to be on the line for you. Okay, do we have any questions about the earnest money section yet? Okay. Oh, and by the way, when you're doing this, let's see, let me pull up. Hopefully you guys, well, I guess if you haven't filled out a Rep C, there's no way you would know. So let's do this. Let me just pull up an MLS ID. Okay, so when you go right here, when it's time for you to fill this in, if you hit auto populate forms, throw in the MLS ID of the home that you're wanting to make an offer on. So this is one of my new listings, so I'll just throw this one in here. Okay, so throw that MLS ID in there, hit fill update fields, and then auto populate form goes away and it didn't work. That's cool. Oh, I had to hit load. I didn't hit load, sorry. So hit load, fill and update fields, and then get rid of this. So now you see the address popped up, the tax ID popped up, the inclusions that are listed on the MLS pop up. It auto-populates the listing agent info down a little bit later. But this is way easier than doing this by hand. Again, as a buyer agent, if they have listed washer, dryer, refrigerator, anything in here as excluded, a lot of times I'll delete it and just check the box without writing it in here. Because I want them to not really notice that they've just promised me the washer and dryer. We've got 2 that are under contract right now that the listing agent called me after we're under contract to say, hey, the washer and dryer were supposed to be excluded. I'm like, yeah, but we included them. And you signed it. Well, but they're planning to take them. They need them. What are you willing to give for them? Because they're ours now.
But they left with stuff, like in the washer dryer, but
Do you want them? Throw them in. And generally, just so you know, generally in an offer, I want to give the seller some things to push back on so that I can get what I actually want, which is what? Cash, like price, concessions, whatever, right? There are things that they probably care about more than a washer and dryer, possibly. And I've got a guy at RC Willie that hooks my clients up with washer and dryer and fridge pricing. He's awesome. And they still get like the delivery for free, haul away old ones for free, all that kind of stuff. But then they like match pricing of like some local stores and stuff. It's pretty sweet. But anyway, so I generally always check that. And then it's important that you know what's in here too. Okay? Read through the included items list. A water softener doesn't have to be listed here. It is, because in the MLS you check it. But even if it's not there, up here it says that it's included, unless the seller specifically excludes it. Okay? TV mounts that are on the wall. The TV goes, but the TV mount is supposed to stay. It's included. It says that right here. So make sure you should know what's here. It's stupid that we have to have ceiling fan listed because it says right here, where is it? Ceiling fans, they're included. Right? You should know what's in here, what's included. Solar panels. Solar panels are included. So if it goes under contract, if you're under contract as a buyer, it has solar panels. You haven't addressed already in an addendum what's happening to those solar panels, how they're being paid off or whatever. They're already included. The seller's got to figure that out. You committed them to us. How are you paying them off? Now, you do have to do the solar addendum, okay? But still, you guys need to know what's in here, all right? You need to be able to hold sellers to that. And once we're under contract, within the first week or so, usually the due diligence period, I go back to the seller. Actually, we usually negotiate repairs, credits, all that kind of stuff from the inspection. Before I go back to the seller, we negotiate that, and then I go back to the seller. Hey, I just want to make sure we remind you, these items we've included and are supposed to stay. Because sometimes they're like, oh, well, that's not included. Well, yes, it is. Maybe they didn't mean to include it, but it is. Okay, and I know that I've said this before. So KW, I don't know where, they used to have it up here, but they used to have a thing of like the core principles of Keller Williams. And one of them is win-win or no deal. I don't believe in that. Okay, now it needs to be a win for you and for your client, but generally I don't believe in that either. Because if it's a win for my client, it's a win for me. Right? That's just the way that I view it and handle my business. If my client's winning, then I'm winning. Okay? Because if my client wins, what do they think about me? What's that? Yeah, I'm awesome. Right? Like, holy crap, you know what Cody got me? Okay, like that's what I want. So if it's a win for my clients, win for me. But you don't need to concern yourself with it being a win for the other side. Now, obviously, like be ethical, don't lie, all that kind of stuff, right? Like don't be shady, but they hired an agent. If that agent doesn't do their job, that's not your problem. Okay, so we just had one that closed that a week before close, we negotiated a fat price reduction because the agent they had just copied and pasted the square footage from previous MLS listing. And it was way off. I knew it was off when we went under contract because I looked at tax records. And the county records showed way less square footage. My clients were fine with it. Didn't matter. If they had said no, would have been fine. We would have closed anyway. But we got a fat price reduction because the listing agent didn't look at county records, and if there's a discrepancy, by the way, I have 4 or 5 different appraisers that if I have a listing and I have a previous MLS ID and county records that are very different square footage wise, I have appraisers that I just pay them $50 and they go in and they do a quick measurement and sketch for me. It's a really cheap and easy way for me to make sure I don't put my clients in a bad spot. Okay. So know what's here. Make sure that you're very strategic and specific about what am I including, what am I excluding. Oftentimes, like I said, I'll ask to include something that my clients don't really care about, because when the seller gives pushback on price, I'll say, well, no, we need that. I'll tell you what, we'll remove the washer, dryer, and fridge. Okay, so purchase price, earnest money, all this stuff right here. Okay, there's these 2 sections right here. New loan and balance of purchase price and cash at settlement. Okay, so what you do is you put the price that you're offering here. Here's the amount of earnest money you listed above. The amount of their loan, the remaining amount, so down payment minus earnest money will be here. And then the total purchase price again right here. I don't know why, honestly, I don't know why section C and E are here. It's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. Because, does someone want to read this for me? Does anybody have the Rep C pulled up that can read that sentence I just highlighted? So you're saying, I can change this whenever I want without even telling you. Then why the crap is it there? I don't know why, but it is. So this is just what I do here as a buyer, okay? I put the highest amount down my client could possibly be putting. So if they've got $300,000 they could put down, doesn't matter if they are or aren't. That's the amount that I put there. That's their down payment amount I'm writing in there. What could you, if you wanted to, how much could you put down? Why do I want to do that as a buyer? Okay, but why is it more appealing? So it's important that you understand why a seller or a listing agent would like it. It's less risky. If I'm buying a $700,000 house and I've got $300,000 down, to a listing agent, it's probably not likely that they won't qualify. It's probably not likely that there will be some repairs that the inspection turns up they can't afford to make if my seller says no. It's just, it is higher likelihood that the transaction is going to get across the finish line. Okay, and it shows they've got some money, some access, some cash. So maybe they won't ask your seller for as much either if you're a listing agent. Maybe they won't ask for carpet credit, that kind of stuff. Okay. Anyway, I always put the highest amount that I can right there, unless if I'm like tugging at heartstrings, like, hey, my clients, they're really tight. They're really tight. This is the top end of our budget. This is really tight. And I'm trying to get concessions. I'm trying to get repair credits, all that kind of stuff. Maybe I throw a smaller amount in there. Okay. Maybe you just do a 3% down. All right. Buyer's ability. This is important that you really understand what this says. You do not have to check this box just because your client has a home that they want to sell before buying a new one. Okay. Buyer's ability. That's what the important word here is, ability. To purchase the property, to obtain the loan referenced, and or any portion of the cash reference. So saying cash referenced. So saying their ability to either get the cash they're having to put down, or their ability to obtain the loan is conditioned or is not conditioned upon selling a previous property. So if you've got a seller that does not want to accept a contingent offer, which why would you not want to, if you're a seller, why would you not want to accept a contingent offer? Take longer, could, right?
It's part of the process that say that they don't sell.
It's just another layer of risk, right? Like, okay, they've got a home to sell. Are they pricing it right? Are they willing to adjust the price to a point where it will actually sell? How urgent are they? Right? Like it's just riskier. Everything just gets harder. But if your buyer could qualify for the loan and buy the house without selling their home, then you don't have to mark it is conditioned upon selling a home. If they could qualify for it without selling their home, then you can choose what you want to mark there. It's strategic. The scenario will dictate what you should or should not do there. Now, if they have to sell it to afford the new home anyway, then you have to mark this, or else you're straight up lying. And I've had that happen a bunch too. I've had, when we've got a home that we're trying to buy, I always ask, be like, okay, do they have a home to sell? No, this isn't contingent. That's not what I asked. Do they have a home that they are going to be trying to sell? Yes. Okay. Has the loan officer told you they can qualify without that selling? Because if the answer to that is no, then this needs to be marked yes. Okay? This is all based on their ability. Can they qualify? Okay? There are some scenarios that helps you to mark yes, some scenarios that helps you to mark no. But again, you need to make sure that you're not lying here. And if you're checking no, it's not conditioned upon the sale of property, then you need to make sure that the loan officer has said that they'll qualify even if it doesn't sell. Okay? Do you have any questions about any of that? All right. Settlement and closing. What does settlement mean? Why does it list settlement and closing separately? We use them sort of interchangeably, but they're not the same. What's the difference? Kind of. What has to happen by settlement? What is the settlement deadline actually? What needs to happen there? What's that? Okay, everything has been signed. What else? What money? Okay, the buyer's money, not the loan proceeds. Okay, they're separate. Okay, so here it says, buyer and seller have signed and delivered to each other or to the escrow company all the documents. Okay, any monies required to be paid by buyer or seller under these documents have been delivered by buyer or seller to the other party or to the title office. Okay, so buyer's funds are at title. Those are the two things. That's settlement. Everything that needs to be signed has been signed, and all of the buyer's money that they have to put down is at title. Okay? Closing, you have, is it 4 days? I think it's 4 days. Where does it say? Where am I missing it? Oh, here we go. 4 calendar days. Okay, so the loan proceeds from the lender, they have up to 4 calendar days. Why do they throw 4 calendar days in there, do you think? What's that? Weekends. Yeah, so if they sign on a Friday, the buyer gets all their money to the title company on Friday, but what if the lender doesn't get their money there Friday? It's not going Saturday, it's not going Sunday. They might send it out on Monday. What if they don't get it till Tuesday, right? So that's what this is. So closing is different. It's important that you understand that. As a buyer agent, if you would want your client to move in over the weekend, if that's what they would want, they want to get keys on a Friday so they can move over the weekend, you should never be putting a settlement deadline on a Friday, ever. Because what if the lender doesn't send their proceeds, the loan proceeds, until the next day? right? So it's important that you understand the difference between these two things. Settlement is signing and buyer funds. Closing, they've got 4 days to get the loan proceeds over. There's a seller, it's kind of the same thing, right? If you are selling a house but buying a new house and you need them to line up, you need to make sure deadlines are on a Thursday, not on a Friday. Fridays have caught a lot of people off guard and screwed up a lot of transactions, screwed up a lot of moving timelines.
So, the earnest money, how many days do you collect earnest money as soon as the offer is put in, or as soon as?
So earnest money, after acceptance of the rep C by buyer and seller and receipt of the earnest money by the brokerage brokerage shall have 4 calendar days in which to deposit the earnest money. But before that, agrees to deliver no later than 4 days after acceptance. So you have to receive the earnest money within 4 days of acceptance. We have up until 4 days to have it actually deposited. So it's basically 8 days, but you have to have that check. So for example, I had a property go under contract on Friday. I'm picking up earnest money today. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
These are really good nuances to know.
You wouldn't believe how many freaking experienced realtors they've never thought through this. They don't actually know. They're like, oh, well, now you're in breach. Like, why am I in breach? I sent you a photo of the check I had collected. Has to be deposited. No, it doesn't. You got 4 days for it to be deposited. I sent you proof that I have received the earnest money. That is, I've fulfilled the 4 days.
I've had realtors on the other sides of transactions get lazy with deadlines and things like that. And then all of a sudden their client has to cancel for whatever reason. And no, I'm not giving that earnest money back. My seller is keeping it. Like you spent time, you took time out of it. We could have gotten another offer and that's his compensation for it. So anyways, yeah, there's a lot of realtors that don't pay attention to.
Well, and I think I mentioned before, I had someone call and say, hey, we need to push the finance and appraisal deadline back. I'm like, why? We don't have the appraisal back. Why? You've had 3 weeks. Why don't you have the appraisal back? Well, they ordered it last week. Okay, why'd they do that? Why did you wait 14 days to order it? Because the appraiser doesn't have like a 24-hour turnaround time. That's on you. We don't have to push the finance and appraisal deadline back. Okay, did you have a? Yeah, that's part of all like the buyer documents. Yeah. So the buyer broker agreement, due diligence checklist, wire fraud disclosure, and the affiliated business agreement that we disclose here. Okay, possession. There's another important one. We talked about things that you can use to negotiate. Possession is a big one. What is normal? And this is beyond closing. So it's recorded with the county. It's closed, it's recorded with the county. How long does the seller get to maintain possession of the property before they turn over keys? What's normal? I would say there's not really a normal. Whatever you guys are happy to agree on. And this, again, this is a point of negotiation. Hey, you want 5 days for possession? I don't want to give you 5 days for possession. So if I'm giving you 5 days for possession, then we need to close when I want to close. You want us to close September 28th? I don't want to make another mortgage payment in November. So we're going to close October 1st. So my client skips their November mortgage payment. Right? So there's some give and take to this. And this is where I ask a listing agent, like, hey, what's your timeline for your seller? What can we give them that they want? How can I make their life easier? Because I'm going to ask for a lot from them. So let me give them some wins where I can. Okay. Just know that you can't have more than 60 days possession. The lender will not allow more than 60 days for possession. It doesn't really come into play much anymore, but it used to. If you go beyond 60 days, there needs to be a leaseback agreement in place. Actually, I don't even think they do a leaseback loan in 60 days. I think there has to be like a rent. beyond that. And even then, if you're buying as a primary residence, now it's an investment property. So you can run into some sticky stuff with a lender if you go beyond 60 days. So I just wouldn't. Okay, special assessments. What is this referring to? Usually it's referring to HOA. That's right. But what else? Where else can they get an assessment from? City. Okay, so for example, when Provo decided to build their big rec center that they have, they assessed every property in Provo, all of them. Okay, same with Lehigh when they did the Legacy. What is that? What it's called? The Legacy, I think, rec center. Yeah, like they assessed every property in the city to pay for that. Instead of increasing property taxes, they just did an assessment. Okay, so it can be HOA. Usually it is. Okay. But this is why it's super important that if you are a listing agent, you find out, are there any impending assessments coming? Right? You need to know. So for example, I've got this townhome that's listed. The HOA is going to replace all the roofs. I knew that they were. I needed to track down how that's being paid for before we listed it. Luckily, there's no assessments coming. It's being paid for because they've collected the cash already. So we're good. But if they came up and we had checked seller, my seller's on the hook to pay for any assessments that come. So there was one I closed in Saratoga Springs. 2 days after we got under contract, the HOA notified everybody of an assessment to replace all of the stucco through the whole townhome community. It was all faulty. It ended up being like $26,000 to the owner of the one that my client was buying. $26,000, but we had checked seller. So the seller now has to pay for all of that, even though we're getting the benefit of that. Okay, so oftentimes, right now, mostly this will be checked seller. Buyers are usually making the seller pay for it, but sometimes you'll get it split. HOA fees. By the way, transfer fees were outlawed. So guess what? Now they call them reinvestment fees. It's the same freaking thing. But basically, they charge you to change ownership. They call it a reinvestment fee. And it's important, same thing, it's important that you know what that amount is. The MLS is not always correct. So I had one that we bought where the MLS listed it as 0.05% of the purchase price. Okay, it was like a $400,000 townhome, so that's $200. Half of a percent would be two grand. This is 0.05%. So $200. Okay, luckily we had checked that the seller was on the hook for this, but listing agent calls me, he's like, hey, it was actually 0.5%. My sellers can't afford it. Then why didn't you list it right? Why don't you do the research and find out the right number? That's the listing agent's job, right? But whatever's here is what is going to be happening at closing. Then nothing. Yeah, you can just mark other and put NA if there's no HOA. Okay, here's the commission section. Okay, I freaking hate that this is in the REPC. Hate it so much. I want the seller to agree to what I am going to be compensated before we ever even make an offer. And there are ways to do that. Okay, is it the compensation form? I think is what it's called, real estate brokerage compensation form. Let me just find it real quick. If it's a home that's been on the market for a while, I think, let's see. Yeah, this is it. Okay. So if it's a home that's been on the market for a little bit, and I know they're probably going to try to get cheap on commission because they've been bringing the price down, whatever, I oftentimes will send this before we even send an offer. Say, hey, I have a client that is interested in making an offer. I'm going to make you agree to pay me my 3% before we even enter into negotiations with this buyer. Okay, so you address the seller, you address who the buyer is, everything, you say what you're working for, 3% gross, net, whatever, doesn't matter. By the way, I think it's so stupid that we pay commissions on gross. If a seller agrees to like a $20,000 credit for a buyer, why should the buyer's agent get paid 3% of that $20,000 credit? It's stupid. Doesn't make any sense. But it is what it is. Okay, so you get them to agree here before you can ever even make an offer, or before you ever even make an offer. Your client has to sign, the seller has to sign. Okay, everybody signs. So I would use that on a home that's been on the market a bit, because now that's already been agreed to. The Rep C, you can like leave that blank. You can say C compensation agreement or whatever.
You said that's for a home that's been on the market for a while.
Usually that's where I do it, yeah.
If it's a couple days market.
Generally, like I'll throw it in here, I guess. I don't like to throw it in here. I hate it. I do it still a lot, but it really depends on the scenario. Like if they're feeling, like when I talk to the listing agent, you can kind of tell how they're feeling. You can tell, are they feeling super confident? Just depends. Yeah. Okay. All right. Here, since I listed my own listing, since I guess loaded my own listing in here, it's going to show my name on both of these. But then you check these boxes here. Okay. We don't do limited agency here, so you'll never be checking the right-hand side because you're not allowed to represent both anyway. Title and insurance. This is referring typically to investment properties. Any rental agreements that are already in place, the seller is acknowledging, or the buyer is acknowledging they're taking those on, right? Now, the lease may allow, all of my leases on my rental properties, I put in there that if I sell the property, the new owner has the option to make the buyer vacate, and they have to just give them a 30-day notice. So, but if you're representing a buyer, you're buying a property that has lease agreements in place, make sure that you've reviewed those, because if they need to get them out, because I sold a rental property up by the U, it was student housing. Everybody that wanted to buy it, they were wanting to buy it so their kid could live in it with their friends. Like everybody, that's who was wanting to buy it. So they needed to make sure that the lease agreements gave the new owner the opportunity to not evict, but like give them a notice that they needed to vacate. Okay, so it's important as a buyer agent that you review that stuff because you have to stick to it. Short-term rental booking, same as like Airbnb, all that right here. Okay, seller has to provide the buyer a title insurance policy that is based on the price of the home. Okay, they have to. This is agreeing to it right here. So if the seller is providing the buyer a title insurance policy, why does the buyer also pay for a title insurance policy? I don't know if you guys knew that. When a buyer closes, they also provide a title insurance policy. They have to buy one. Why? Who's it for? The lender. Yep. So they're providing a title insurance policy for the lender. Seller disclosures. There's a lot of stuff in here. Okay. You as a buyer agent need to be going through the seller's disclosures. You need to be going through all the HOA docs. You need to be going through the minutes because the listing agent may not have caught that there's an upcoming assessment, but you can see it in the HOA meeting minutes because even though it hasn't been assessed yet, it will outline that it's been discussed, right? So you need to be going through those things and protecting your buyer. Okay. Also, I have a client that we're buying a home. They want to put in a basement apartment, right? If they can't put in a basement apartment, the purchase doesn't make sense. So what do I need to do as a buyer's agent? I need to go through the CC&Rs and make sure they can have one. Okay.
It's so important to know what the HOA like allows. I have a client right now who had bought a townhouse and they moved out, bought a new place, wanted to rent it out to some renters. HOA won't allow it. They only allow first home residents. So now they're having to sell it, and if they had not beforehand, they would have had different plans.
But these are conversations you need to have with your buyers before you're ever even looking at homes. Okay, so if I'm in a buyer consult and my clients tell me what they want out of a home, one of the questions I should ask is, okay, what's the long-term plan with this home? Are we looking for a home that you can live in and then sell when we upgrade? Or are you wanting to start building a rental portfolio? If that's the case, the kinds of homes we look at might be different. The location might be different. The HOA might dictate whether this is a good purchase if you're wanting to keep the home as a rental down the road.
or have that as an option.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's your job to make sure that you go through this stuff, okay? Due diligence condition. This mainly, in my opinion, all this is really putting in here is that the seller is agreeing to coordinate or to cooperate with you in doing due diligence. You can, pardon me, you can cancel up until your financing and appraisal deadline and just cite financing and get your earnest money back anyway. The due diligence condition is really saying the seller will cooperate in my desire to do an inspection. If that inspection turns up anything, they'll cooperate if I need to get a professional in there to get a second look and an estimate on structural issues, plumbing, electrical, whatever it may be. Okay. This is giving you right to cancel based on due diligence up until your due diligence deadline. Beyond the due diligence deadline, you can't cite due diligence to cancel, but if the impending costs of the repairs or whatever from the due diligence would now make your financing not possible, then now you're not canceling because of due diligence, you're canceling because of financing. Okay, it's a little bit of a tricky thing. Okay, if you cancel after due diligence, please don't check the box that says I'm canceling based on due diligence, because now you've lost your earnest money. All you have to do is check a different box and you can get your earnest money back. Appraisal condition. All right, this is saying that if the property does not appraise for at least the price we've agreed to, I don't have to buy it. Okay, but there's a deadline to this too, right? It's that finance and appraisal deadline. Some people misunderstand and they think the finance and appraisal deadline means I need to have a clear to close and everything by a finance and appraisal deadline. That's usually not going to happen by the finance and appraisal deadline because they still need to run a second, like another verification of employment. Sometimes you need to pull credit again just to see if you've opened up any new lines, that kind of stuff before you can close. So really, finance appraisal deadline is, okay, we feel confident enough by that deadline that I am going to be able to close, that I'm comfortable moving past that deadline. That's really all that is. Okay. Now, what happens if the appraisal comes in low? Let's say you're under contract at 600, appraisal comes in at 595. What happens? Do they? There's nothing in here that says that the seller is agreeing to lower it if the appraisal is low. This just says the buyer has the right to cancel based on appraisal. So if the appraisal is low, what are the possible solutions? One is that the seller lowers the price to match the appraisal. What are the others? What's that? Buyer can cancel. Okay, but what are you negotiating? So we've got lower the price, walk away. What are we negotiating? What's the third option? There's actually like 4, okay? So 1 is the seller lowers the price. 2 is the buyer cancels. 3 is the buyer pays that amount in cash on top of their down payment and closing costs when they close. Okay, so if their down payment was going to be $15,000, their closing costs were 7, that means 22,000, right? If there's a $5,000 gap now, the seller won't lower it, the buyer wants to buy the property, now they've got to come in with 27,000 when they close instead of 22. Okay? The fourth option is like maybe the seller comes down some, buyer comes up some, right? There's sort of like this is where I was talking about like the negotiate part, right? Like, hey, we're $5,000 off. I'll cover 2 if you'll lower the price 3. Okay, so you can kind of like find some middle ground. But those are the only solutions if the appraisal is low. In this market, no one should be bringing cash over appraised value. Unless it's a neighborhood, an area where homes are going. I have neighborhoods that like homes don't come available for sale. I have clients that want them and they'll pay whatever to get one in that neighborhood. And homes never hit the market. They're sold before they're ever even on the MLS. Right? So in those situations, it'd be different. Okay, right here, you're going to check financing required if they have to get a loan. Okay, and you have to, right? This is all being ethical and honest, right? So, okay, right here, this says and again, this is only in like in a market where like the buyer is trying to win. Like there's multiple offers, there's some competition. You can put in here, all right, if we cancel, even if we're not past our appraisal deadline, this much of my earnest money will be given to the seller. Okay? Generally, won't be doing that much. Okay, if the Rep C is canceled as provided in section 8.3b, buyer agrees that all of buyer's earnest money deposit or deposits, if applicable, should be released to the seller. Okay, so let's talk about this right here. Additional earnest money, sometimes people want to say, hey, at my due diligence deadline, I'll put more earnest money down. Again, this is a way for them to say, like, hey, I'm more serious, I've got more skin in the game, whatever it might be. Okay, addenda, anything you are attaching to this purchase contract as a part of your offer needs to be listed here. Okay, if they're getting an FHA or a VA loan, you have to have the FHA VA loan addendum. Home warranty, most buyers are getting a home warranty. So here you would check a home warranty will be included. It will be ordered by the buyer, company selected by the buyer, but paid for by the seller. And then you'd throw in the amount that you're asking for right here, 700, 800, whatever it may be.
That's not.
What's that?
That's not.
No. This is, does the buyer care to have a home warranty? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If it's a home where like my client is going in and like redoing a bunch of stuff, like they're going to replace the AC, they're going to replace the water heater, the furnace, maybe the electrical needs to be, then we, like, I don't care. We're replacing it all. We don't need a home warranty. But generally, I try to get one. What else are we filling out here? Okay, right here, this one's, I don't know what you like to do. I always check may at the option of the parties. So any dispute relating to the Rep C before or after closing either shall go to mediation or may at the option of the parties go to mediation. I always put may at the option because if we can figure it out, why should we be forced to pay a mediator? Right? Like we should have the option to figure it out ourselves before having to be committed to go to pay a mediator. Okay, buyer default and seller default. This is what I was talking about earlier. The seller can't cancel, they can only default. Okay, buyer default is basically by the settlement deadline, they haven't signed and gotten their funds over. Now, let's say you only got one offer. You're the listing agent. You only got one offer. You accepted it. We get through to closing. The buyer hasn't signed. It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. That's the deadline. The buyer hasn't signed yet. Should the seller just cancel it, take their earnest money of $3,000 and put it back on the market? Probably not. Find out why they didn't sign. Find out why we're not closed yet. And maybe be patient. I've had some where the seller waited like 5 days for us because my lender, not my lender, my buyer's lender was an idiot and just didn't get us where we should have been by that point in time. Okay, so again, every scenario is a little bit different.
First offer is contingent on cost being sold. It's been months, their house still, so you've got a second offer that comes in. Gosh, they want it closed now. And, so how, if you take a second offer, are you still going to have to pay that, right? The first offer is first year?
You're saying you've accepted both offers?
Yes. So if you want to take the second offer.
So you haven't accepted any offers yet?
Okay, and their house has not sold, so you're in.
How has it been months and you still haven't canceled? So that all would be based on these dates right here. So this is where it's super inconsiderate, but I do it all the time. I like to lock up a property with a never-ending date, never-ending finance and appraisal deadline. Okay, because if you have a home to sell and it's contingent, then the finance and appraisal deadline here, that is when your earnest money goes non-refundable. That's when you have to have your home under contract and the ability to close. When I'm making an offer and we've got a home to sell, I don't put a date here. I put within 24 hours of the finance and appraisal deadline on an accepted contract on the sale of my buyer's previous property. That means we don't have a date. The date is whatever the finance and appraisal deadline is on an offer we accept. Why do I do that? That makes it so my buyer, their earnest money is never non-refundable until our buyer's earnest money is non-refundable. So if they cancel, I can cancel and pass their money along to the seller of the home I'm trying to buy. These guys caused this whole thing, so I'm going to use their money to pay off the seller. Does that make sense? Well, I write it right here. In this line right here, I write within 24 hours of finance and appraisal deadline on accepted offer on buyer's previous property. Yeah, I write it in. And then settlement deadline, same thing. Within 24 hours of settlement deadline on accepted contract on buyer's previous property.
You have listing agents accept that offer?
They're idiots. I've got one under contract right now that we've got this.
I would never accept that offer for a time.
You shouldn't. You shouldn't. But know what you're doing, right? And again, this is where the one that I've got under, we've got one under contract right now that luckily we've got the sale of their home under contract. We're fine. And it didn't take long. But we got under contract. The listing agent, he's an experienced dude, but he hasn't had anything close for like 4 or 5 months. And he's like so excited to get an offer on this property that he's just like, oh, let's go ahead and just accept it. And holy crap. And what we did to get the things that we wanted was we agreed for it to be an as-is purchase. I can still ask you for credits and repairs and stuff. Just because I agreed that it's as-is doesn't mean we can't change that. So after the inspection, we came back and negotiated another credit and stuff, even though we agreed to not do that.
Because they can cancel if you do.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to, but they can.
Yeah.
So say it again, you say within 24 hours of
So
buyer.
within 24 hours of F&A deadline on accepted offer on buyer's previous property. So it literally is like a never-ending finance and appraisal deadline until we have the sale of our home under contract. And then same thing for settlement. That's what I do if I've got a home to sell. Now again, they hope, for their client's sake, I hope their agent is smart enough to catch that and not agree to it. One of my agents on my team, this is 2 years ago, he calls me, he's like, hey, we did something stupid. I'm like, we or you? And he goes, I did something stupid. We accepted an offer that wrote in what we write in for finance and appraisal. I was like, why? He's like, I don't know. And that home, like that was under contract for like 4 months. The buyer had like no urgency to drop their price, nothing. We were screwed. And the seller, of course, like the seller like sued my client or sued my agent after we closed. Of course. They signed it, but he should have caught it.
How did they sue him? Are they able to do that?
Of course, anyone can sue anyone for anything.
But
You don't have to have grounds. Anyone can sue anything. $10,000.
just for wasted time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, because that was 3 more mortgage payments they had to make out of their pocket. And I mean, this is 2 years ago. It was still busy enough market that we could have sold it. We could have found another buyer if we had just caught that and either said no or written a date in there. Okay, so we go up here, buyer default, seller default. Okay. Oh, and time is of the essence. What does this mean? If you've got a calendar date right here for a deadline, what is the deadline? What's that? When that day? 5 p.m. Okay, you need to know that. I've gotten cancellations past 5 p.m. on finance and appraisal deadline. I'm like, you idiot. You had this signed at 4 o'clock. You send it to me at 5:30. We get your earnest money now. And I've also been an a-hole and I've sent cancellations 2 minutes before 5 p.m. on an F&A deadline. I don't want to, right? You try to avoid it if you can, but
Why did it go so close to that? Just because that's how you had to get it done that fast, or?
So the only time I've ever gotten that close is because there's something I was blindsided by and there was no way I could have known. Called the listing agent and they absolutely won't move F&A back. And it's like 4:45. They won't, well, either they won't agree to push it back or they can't get a hold of their client and I can't get an answer. Okay, I'm not letting my client's money be at risk. I'm going to send you a cancellation. We can reinstate the contract if your client agrees to make some adjustments.
Were they able? You guys able to get it back?
Mm-mm. Yeah. Okay, so by the way, this is not a response deadline. Everyone calls it a response deadline. It's not deadline for response. It's deadline for what? Acceptance. If you're counteroffering, you don't need to address the deadline that's here. Okay, that's the deadline for acceptance. Everyone on a counteroffer, if it's past this deadline, they always say deadline for response on Rep C, blah, blah, blah. You don't need to address it. We're counteroffering it. Okay, everyone will. Go ahead and do it. Doesn't matter. But this is the deadline for acceptance. Everything that's in here, if this isn't accepted by this timeline, this offer lapses, right? Does anybody have any questions about the Rep C? This will be what you will use the most. Or sometimes you'll make an offer, you won't use any additional documents. But this is the one that you'll use the most. Okay, the one thing I want to say, so if you're making an FHA or a VA loan offer, which you will make a lot of FHA offers, you have to have the FHA addendum. My favorite part about the FHA addendum is it has a section for closing cost contribution, so you don't have to draft an additional addendum addressing closing costs. But also, in there, in a scenario where, so I use this a lot during like 2020, 2021, we would make earnest money non-refundable to win, right? Very normal. Hey, $5,000 earnest money, $2,500, immediately non-refundable upon acceptance. And then we would waive appraisal. If it's an FHA or VA loan, you can't actually waive appraisal. Appraisal has to happen. And on that addendum, it specifically states that if the appraisal is below the purchase price, then no earnest money can be non-refundable to the buyer. So we're saying on addendum 1, hey, this much earnest money is immediately non-refundable. Addendum 2 is the FHA addendum saying, hey, psych, if the appraisal is low, the earnest money can't be non-refundable.
That's kind of misleading, though.
Totally.
Is it ethical? Like,
Know what you're doing. Whose job is it to catch it?
it is their job. But I don't know.
I didn't write the FHA addendum.
You're right. No, you're right. Like, by the
That is government language.
by the letter of the contract.
Yeah. And then one thing that I've done a lot, like when we're competing, is we'll say, hey, on June 30th, the buyer will release an amount from their earnest money to the seller that equals the amount of the seller's July 1st mortgage payment. Seller thinks, sweet, extra money. They're paying my mortgage payment. They don't realize we still have time to cancel. If I cancel, you still have to refund me that money. They think it's extra money. It's not extra money. It's coming out of the earnest money, which is all just going towards my cost to close anyway. Okay, so again, it's just really important that you understand the documents that you're using, please. Don't get caught in a scenario where you're allowing your clients to accept something or check a box or something that is putting them at risk and you didn't know. So let me give you guys a few documents that you want to be familiar with, okay? So one, again, the blank addendum, any freaking thing you write in there can happen. You can write some crazy crap. We've included a Harley that was in a garage, and we got it. Okay, and again, I don't think the seller's agent was paying attention. We've included a lot of things that I don't think the sellers really paid attention to. So the other thing I do is on here, see at the top, I can have all of these printed fields, the fill-in fields in black or in blue. I have mine in black. In blue, it stands out the things that I've written. In black, it doesn't. So it's the seller's agent's job to go through and read them. Right? It's not my job to say, hey, by the way, here's everything that's in there. Now, if they catch it, great, they catch it. I wrote it in. You should catch it. But if you don't, sweet, I win. Okay? But the blank addendum, you can write all sorts of crazy stuff in there. And whatever you guys all agree to, you agree to. Right? The FHA VA loan addendum, you need to know that. Closing cost addendum, solar addendum, right? Any home that has solar, you should never make an offer as a buyer without addressing how that solar is going to be taken care of. And just know that taking over the payments on solar financing is harder than it sounds, and it can affect your buyer's ability to even purchase the property, because if they're already tight on DTI, you guys all know what DTI is, debt to income? Okay, if you're already tight DTI-wise, now add on another $25,000 commitment that hasn't been paid yet, $174 a month, whatever it may be. Now maybe they don't even qualify for that purchase anymore. Or that loan finance or the solar financing company needs to run credit before they can give that buyer the ability to take over that. Maybe now they've run that credit, that drops their credit score enough that it increases their rate, and now they don't qualify, now they can't make that payment either. So there's all these parts of this that can make it tricky. So as a buyer, you should never enter into a contract with solar attached to a home without addressing it. And there are homes I've bought that solar wasn't checked on the MLS listing, but I see solar on the roof. So we need to address it. Okay. What other addenda do we use a lot? Disclosure of interest, yeah. I don't use it. I don't use that a lot because I don't do a lot of transactions for people I'm related to. But funny thing is, my wife's family, all of my in-laws, they send me business like crazy. My family doesn't. It's weird. It's weird because I'm a loudmouth and they don't like it. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, disclosure of interest. So you'll use occasionally. Subject to sale. That one's, you're going to use a lot. Subject to sale of buyer's property. Okay, so you list the address of the home that you're selling. You check a box that says it's either listed or not listed. You put who is the listing agent, which hopefully is you if you're representing them on a purchase. And that right there states that if their home is not already on the MLS, they only have 7 days to get on the MLS. So again, if you're using that and you can't have their home on the MLS within 7 days or it's not convenient, you need to have a blank addendum that comes after that. So that would be addendum 1. Addendum 2 says buyer has 14 days to get their home on the MLS, something like that. You can adjust it after.
That's what the blank addendum.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yep. Okay. I mean, those are the main ones that you'll probably use early on. Oh, and by the way, as a buyer agent, you'll have some people, they love having earnest money deposited at title. As a buyer agent, I never want my earnest money deposited at title. Do you guys know why? If I cancel, even if I am well within my deadlines and I get all my earnest money back, what has to happen before I get my earnest money back if we've deposited a title? Who else has to agree? The seller. If it's been deposited at title, the seller has to sign off on the buyer getting the earnest money back. Even if we've met our deadlines. If you've deposited at the brokerage, the only person that has to sign off is Dean. He looks at the contract. Yep, you've met your deadlines. Here's the earnest money back.
Yeah.
I don't ever want the seller to have a say in my buyer getting the earnest money back. I will never deposit earnest money at title unless the seller makes me. And usually that only happens when it's like a new build and the builder makes us use title and makes us deposit money in title. Oh, pardon me. Okay, that's all I've got for you guys. Do you have any questions or anything? I would study the documents you plan to use. There shouldn't be any sections in that document that you're not familiar with if you're asking a client to sign it. That includes the buyer-broker agreement. That includes the listing agreement. You should be familiar with them to where if a client asks you about it, you know what's going on.
Do you have any real life purchases that you're making right now? You are negotiating different things. Obviously, you have listings and stuff, but do you have any?
Yeah, so I've got a contract. I've got a purchase that we're under contract on. So on a conventional loan, you're limited to 3% that you can get from the seller in concessions. Okay, on a conventional loan.
With 5%.
Yeah, I think it's 10 and below, isn't it?
Below, is it below 10?
I think it's 10 and below.
Yeah, 10, actually below 10, I think at 10.
Okay, he might be right. I thought it was 10 and below, but you might be right. It might be below 10. But most of my buyers right now, for whatever reason, most of them aren't making 10% or higher down payments. So we're limited to what we can get in a concession from a seller. Okay, and it depends on what that's for. So for example, if we want a concession for repairs, and the repairs will not be done by closing, the lender will say, okay, you've got $10,000 in repairs here. In estimates, we need the seller to stick 150% of that at title just in case the estimates are too high. Sellers don't want to do that, right? So we're trying to figure out a way. So anyway, I've got one that we already agreed to like $25,000 in concessions for repairs. Really, my client is a contractor. We're agreeing to have that held at title for repairs made, and it has to be paid out to a contractor. My client's a contractor. He's going to pay himself to do his basement finish out of that money. Seller doesn't need to know what it's for. We asked for this concession, and the listing agent said, you can't have more than that. You can't have that amount. They'll make you do 150%. I'm like, don't worry about it. They won't. I figured this out with my lender. We figured out how to word it so it sounds vague. It sounds like maybe the repairs have already been done and we're just paying invoices. That's not the case, and we didn't say that's the case. But so some things like that. So we're basically buying the home below appraisal, and the seller's paying for about 80% of the basement finish. So we're buying a home with a finished basement for under appraisal of what it is without a basement
And
finish.
he's paying himself.
And he's paying himself for the work.
That's awesome.
So you can get creative. Good? Okay. Thanks, you guys. I got a jet.